Hello, guys, and welcome back to another podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about erasure of Black history in modern history textbooks, and we're just going to be telling you about something like history books in Canada don't have or don't really include anything about like Black history. So just sit down and relax, grab a snack, and yeah, just tune in.
So the three main topics we'll be talking about is obviously erasure of Black history in modern textbooks, whitewashing, and teaching Black history in Canada to fight racism.
So in Canada, as we know, we learn a lot about history, and although we are taught African Canadian history, we are not taught enough about it in class.
I actually kind of agree with that, Maylin, because I feel like when I came to Canada, to be honest, I really didn't learn much about Black history, right? I was like, like I didn't have no clue like of what like I was learning, you know what I mean? But like just growing up, I really didn't get that knowledge. And until the Black Lives Matter movement, that's when I started learning more things about it. And I feel like it's such an important thing. I feel like it should be included in history books, and it's something it shouldn't like be missed out on.
I agree. I think it's something that's really needed because as a group of people, African Canadians don't really have accurate track of their history, and the need for it to be published in textbooks and for them to feel represented is because they just need to have this sense of like community, like knowing where they came from, knowing about their people, their people's accomplishments. And I feel like many African Canadians only know aspects of their history from African American history, which is also whitewashed. So they actually have no idea like how did Black people arrive in Canada and how did they disperse and how did they get into different regions and stuff. That those are things that I feel like are essential in modern education.
And with that being said, I think it's interestingly enough that people like to downplay the kind of significance and that sort of aspect of Black people being in Canada because they focus a lot on things in America. They focus on Black history in America. They're like, oh, we don't have that here. We don't have that discrimination, that racism, that alienation, but it is like, it's still here. It's still prevalent. And because people like to downplay it and compare it to America and their Civil War and their slavery tracks, like they don't feel that Canada needs to have that sort of representation as well. And nobody knows enough about that. We don't know enough about the history from America to Canada, from these Black slaves in America to Canada. We don't learn about any of that. And neither do we learn about the positive aspects of Black history in Canada as well, like inventions that were made by Black women, Black men. I feel like that is something that is kind of neglected to be taught about in our education system as well.
I totally agree with you, Blessing. I feel like non-Black people already have so much history going on in their textbooks, and great for that. Honestly, it's great because we get to learn more. But also, just like in general, like Black history is also important because it has shaped, it has been a really important part of history, and it's not giving enough recognition. And I feel like we should, or like the Canada's like education systems should include a big like a good like piece of amount of information also about like the civil rights movement and just everything like that's important for us as for me as a non-Black person, for me to learn, and also for like other people.
Exactly. We learn stuff from America. We learn all the history aspects. We learn about Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, all of that. It happened in America. We don't learn significant aspects that happened in Canada and how it affects us.
Yeah, and I think some of the things that we should be learning too is the civil rights movement and why it's not included in history textbooks in Canada, and why do they make it look so old when it's not, and it's happening right now.
Yeah, I was actually researching about it earlier, and actually, um, the civil rights movement pictures, if you see pictures, they're like black and white, right? And it makes it look like really old, like, oh, it looks like it happened like ages ago. But it's actually not, they were actually like taking in color pictures. There was actually back then when that movement happened, there was like actually like color pictures. The first color picture came out in around 1851, and this civil rights movement was like in 1950s or like 1960s, meaning that there was already colored pictures. So why didn't like why did they have to show it in black and white?
Not only do we neglect to learn about these things, or we neglect to be taught about these things in schools, but it's that aspect of it as well where you just mentioned that they show pictures not in color to make it seem like it was so long ago. That is like the epitome of erasure. Like that is the greatest example of erasure in modern history books and in society overall. The kind of tendency to stray away from teaching kids and teaching Black kids and white kids and other races of kids about the Black history, and then in addition to that, making it seem like it was so long ago through these photos is kind of like a trail. It's a continuing cycle that continues to perpetuate and take away the importance of Black history. And it's soon enough, it is going to affect youth, and it has affected youth, and it's going to affect overall just the population of Black kids and other kids that want to learn about it but can't. And that is just what's going to continue to make racism worse and just overall spread oblivion and ignorance in these topics.
This is why we should start including, or like the government should start including more topics about Black history, because it will teach our generation and then other generations, more about Black history, and about also this racism and, all this stuff and that Black people have gone through, and, just also like their history in general. If we start now, it could, if we start now, it will affect our generation, on how, on their knowledge.
I agree with Blessing. I think that the whole thing with them making the pictures black and white in order for people to think that it happened a longer time ago, it was so old. It keeps on pushing the whole notion of, oh, forget about it. That happened a long time ago. Why are you guys still holding on to things that happened like this long ago? It pushes, like she said, it worsens racism, systemic and individual. It continues to push it because people see these things as something that was ancient, and they don't think that the things they do currently hold as much like value because this happened such a long time ago. They can't take it that serious if I do it now.
I think a really big point as well, like you mentioned, is to really sit and acknowledge that you having a factor of this like constant pushing of this notion of erasing Black history doesn't only affect people now, Black people, other people. Like it doesn't only affect them, but it affects future generations, because like you said, they instill this kind of mindset of this systematic racism doesn't exist. The systematic racism is not getting worse. It was so long ago, it's gone. But that's not the case. It still exists. It's still prevalent. It's still there. And that is going to be carried on. That mindset is going to be carried on throughout generations. And eventually, like they have in the past, people are going to be able to, and education systems, our society is going to be able to just make anything our path of our history, our trail, whatever we believe we were, that's going to cease to exist eventually. It's just not going to exist. And that is exactly why. So we have to make it important. We have to make it relevant. We have to kind of let them know, like, hey, this is wrong.
Yeah, honestly, and add on to that, what I was trying to say early is that it's like if we start teaching like kids right now from like little, or until like whatever age they are, if we start teaching them now, it will probably not resolve the whole like the whole like racism in the future, but it will keep kids and teenagers more accountable, uh of things of like what they of what like they should know, and like how of things, what to say and not what to say, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get you. I get what you're saying. Like it'll teach them not, well, they should know, and it's common knowledge not to say certain slurs, not to act a certain way, not to
Yeah,
appropriate
exactly.
culture. Yeah, I get exactly what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It holds them accountable so they don't have any excuse for being ignorant. Because right now they do have an excuse in a way because they don't know anything about it. But if stuff like this were portrayed in like the media, history books, and all those things, they wouldn't have an excuse for being blatantly racist and stuff because they're educated on the topics.
And adding on to what Gabby said earlier, it's good that we learn now because we are the future generation, and whatever we do now will affect us in the future. So we'll always look back to what we did back then.
And I would like to say that when we talk about wanting Black history in modern textbooks and the media, just for people to be more aware of it, we also want Black accomplishments because people have a tendency to make sorrowful events in the Black community their focal point when they're talking about Black history. And I would like us to talk about like positive things that have happened in the Black community, like the geniuses and musical geniuses, like academic geniuses.
I
Yeah.
totally agree with what you're saying. Like, I feel like when they think of Black History Month, they only think of like, oh, the soldiers or something who died or something. I feel like we should like acknowledge and like celebrate like, oh, the first woman to, I don't know, develop a mathematical sign or something like that. Like praise what we accomplished rather than thinking, oh, non-people of color just do it all and we just follow.
I feel like this ties, like you guys said, I don't know if this is an aspect of the topic, but into whitewashing. I feel like when you're put, especially going to like a PWI, predominantly institution when I was a kid, a lot of the times I felt like it was hard to be myself and not having the representation in history books and having to kind of stand alone in a community where there was nobody else there. I felt like I had to conform. Do you know what I mean? Like when you're an individual and you're left in a society where there's no one like you, it's kind of like you're forced to conform or you're just alienated. There's no option. And it might not be directly or deliberately, but that is what happens. It is what you have to kind of just yield to. And it's one of those situations where everyone could ask, well, what's wrong with conforming to a group of people that's not your own? And that's totally fine. Be friends with whoever you're friends with. But it kind of makes you feel, you're always going to feel that touch of alienation. Like you're never going to feel like you belong. There's always going to be things that you don't get. Your culture still has to be represented, even if you're kind of, if you're trying to learn with anybody else's culture, you still have to have that representation of your own before you hang out with somebody else that's different from you. You have to accept your own, and having to conform kind of gives up that sense of identity where you're not representing your own culture. You're kind of just you're lavishing in someone else's, you're indulging in someone else's instead of kind of realizing your own. And having to conform in a PWI, any other institution like that, is the worst thing. And when teachers neglect, or the education system rather neglects to teach you about yourself, it's kind of like there's no where to turn. It's like you're at school and then it's like you feel that you're just alienated and you're not like anybody and you have to kind of change your identity. And then in addition to that, it's like you're fighting to keep that identity in classrooms where you're not even allowed to be taught about your ancestors, your history, your culture, your identity. And that's a really big aspect of the education system that needs to be fixed.
And I feel like people might be like, okay, but how does this tie into what we're talking about? The thing is, a lack of cultural representation, like cultural deprivation, leads to like self-hate. So if a lot of kids do not get to know about their culture, they're not educated about where they're from, their people, their community,
Definitely.
they tend to have this sort of like grudge against people that they see living a life that they want to live. If let's say I was born in a predominantly white neighborhood and all I've ever done, or quotes,
white things, and I see a bunch of Black kids just having fun and indulging in like cultural experiences and stuff, dancing, let's say singing, R&B, Afro beats, whatever it might be. And I look at them, I have like this certain, I'm either mad at them, jealous of them, or I just call them stereotypical things like, oh, they're ghetto and that and that and that and that, because I lack that myself. And instead of trying to educate myself on that, I project that on them, and I'm mad at them for living a life that I want to live. And this affects the youth, like you said prior, like this affects a bunch of kids. I've seen a lot of people who do have this mindset and still entertain this mindset. And this affects little kids too, who might grow up and when they lack knowledge on their culture, start acting like this. They harbor self-hatred.
100%.
Exactly. I totally agree with you, Naomi.
Yeah, like you said, like they start to develop this this preconceived like idea of what like entails from their race, entails from their peers that are like them, their friends that are Black. They don't, it's rather they're jealous of them, or it's just they begin to hate them, and there's no other option, and it's not their fault, because it's kind of what society is just ingrained in them. It's just it's the life that they've lived and they are living. And that's why it's so important to kind of realize your identity and not feel like you need to conform. But this stems from a lot. It stems from the education system, like we just mentioned. And it stems from overall trying to love yourself in a society where people might want to, quote unquote, whitewash you. Do you know what I mean? Or turn your culture into someone else's. And that's not right.
Like, it's I feel like, yeah, like I totally agree with you, Blessing and Naomi. Honestly, it's good to keep in touch with your roots, in your culture, because it does affect you in some way, because like how you and Naomi were saying, if you don't have that knowledge of your culture and your roots, you're just gonna like self-hate and the things that go on, like in your culture, you're not gonna know like a lot of stuff, and like you're just gonna just lack that knowledge. And honestly, you can try to teach it yourself, but also sometimes we're not sure if it's right what we're learning or wrong. So it would be nice to have like schools, to come in that and also teach us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. And to put in a better term, what I was trying to say is, if you lack cultural awareness, like if you don't know anything about your culture, you tend to live off stereotypes. Like you just think about stereotypes. Now that you don't know anything about Black people, when you see a bunch of Black kids, that's the first thing that goes through your mind. Or they're probably doing drugs, or they're probably twerking. I don't know, whatever they think about Black kids these days. And because you don't know what actually goes on. You have no cultural knowledge. You live off what you know. And living in a predominantly white neighborhood prior, there's some certain stereotypes that you might know. Oh, these Black ghetto kids, one of them probably has a gun. And that's probably what you're thinking as you're seeing a group of Black teenagers having just fun.
One thing that I really wanted to say is, as a Black person, if you feel like you've lost your identity and you're just basing, like Naomi said, you're basing everything you see off stereotypes when you see other Black people, keep in mind your friends that are kind of instilling these stereotypes in you are not your friends. Just because they tell you, oh, you're not like the rest of them, you can make fun of them with us. That is not your friend. That is really much not your friend. You are starting to like, just because you have, or you're showing hate or anger towards, just because you're showing hate or anger towards your community doesn't mean that they have accepted you into theirs. Like you're not of significance to them. You're not relevant. It's like you losing your identity and culture. I like using that term rather than, let's say, whitewashing, but you losing your culture and trying to become something you're not doesn't necessarily mean that you are a different culture. Just because you lack identity and acknowledgement of your own culture as a Black person does not make you white. That is not what that is. I think people really need to understand that. That's a very big misconception. you're not white, you're not Asian, you are still Black. You are still very much Black, and still have that mindset and that acknowledgement. When you see other Black kids, don't say, hey, you're a Black kid, you must be doing this, this, and this, A, B, and C. Because guess what? You are still very much like them. You still come from the same experiences, and believe it or not, you still have the same identity as them. And I'm so sorry to say, because some people just don't acknowledge that.
I absolutely agree.
And I feel like we're influenced by what we see on the media, and that we're gullible. So whatever they do, we start doing, and it becomes a trend. And once the trend is off, we're gonna stop doing that.
I get you. One thing that I really wanted to point out, we just spoke about people that have self-hate and that kind of harvest that self-hate as like specifically Black people. I see this a lot with other minority groups. But I just want to talk about the misconception of whitewashing, okay? If you are a Black person and you have self-hate, okay? And you develop this stereotype about Black people saying, oh, Black people do this, Black people act a certain way. Do not point out a Black person on the street that is walking and maybe, I don't know, doing something else, wearing something different, and say that they are not Black. They're whitewashed. That is not what whitewash means. Just because someone doesn't fit into the stereotype of what you think they are does not mean that they're any less Black than you. That is the big misconception of whitewashing. You cannot claim somebody to be whitewashed if they act or dress a certain way. That is not, Black people, like Sakura said in the previous video, Black people come in all different shapes, sizes, different personalities. You can't make them conform. You can't force people to act a certain way to make them appear more Black to you. Because that's what it is. You're trying to process the thoughts in your head, not in their head, not in society, not to just figure things out. You're trying to make it make sense to you. And that is a big issue. So if you're a Black person, do not have these preconceived stereotypes set in your head for what a Black person is, because you can't dictate that. You are not the sayer of all Black people. You can't sit and say, hi, you act this way, you're not a Black person, you are whitewashed. That is not what the word means. That is not what it means.
I absolutely agree. On the topic of whitewashing, I liked how you pointed out the fact that Black people are not a monolith. There's not one type of way to be Black. And that's the thing with the erasure of history. The only thing portrayed as like this certain Black person. So now people expect a Black person to be just one thing, because we lack our history and we lack like diversity within our culture, because people don't know about other ways. There's different type of Black people, just like we have Caribbeans, we have African Americans, African Canadians, we have Africans themselves. And because people just lack knowledge on like different ways of being Black or different aspects of the Black community, they expect all Black people to act the same. They expect all people to look the same, to talk the same, to maybe even walk the same. I don't know. That's something that I think is way too common these days and needs to be distinguished.
Thank you for tuning in for our podcast. That's enough for today. I hope you enjoyed and learned something new. Be sure to DM us at OCS Roots if you have any comments, questions, concerns, thoughts, any of that. We'll be sure to message you back immediately as soon as we can. And be sure to tune into the next one.